All right, welcome to part 1 of Module 2. In this module, remember we're reviewing Python basics, and so in part 1 we're going to look at variables, data types, and operators, which are fundamental concepts to learn before you start coding in Python. Now, as I've mentioned, there's a lot more to Python that we're going to cover here, but the things that we're going to cover in this module should definitely get you up to speed and be able to code in Python and follow along with the rest of the modules. So to start in part 1 of Module 2, let's look at variables. And so what is a variable? A variable in Python is just a container that holds data. And that data can vary. So if we look at example 1 here, it could be the patient ID, which is just some text and numbers here. It could be a whole number, such as an integer for the patient age, or it could be the patient's temperature, and that would be a float value since that contains a decimal. And so in all of these, the variable is patient ID, patient age, and patient temperature. And so those are the variables that just hold the associated data for that variable. Now there's also some variable naming rules, which is just good convention to follow. And so one thing that seems kind of obvious, but it's still good to think about, is using a variable name that makes sense to the data that is holding. And so for instance, with patient ID, you would want to put the patient's ID there, not their room number or what medications they're receiving or something silly like that. And patient age, obviously that should be patient age, not their blood glucose level. And then you'll also see here that using lowercase is a good convention to follow, along with separating more than one word with underscores. So using that underscore to separate words and then maintaining the lowercase. So some examples of that. Now, I'm going to use blood glucose as an example here for variable naming rules. We see this first example is the right way to write a variable name for blood glucose, or the correct way. Now these other examples are not wrong, and they're not going to break the code, as we can see here if I run that cell, but that's just not a good convention to use. We're using all caps here, capitalizing the first letter here, which maybe makes sense, but it's still not a good convention, or using an underscore to start here. So just follow those variable naming rules, and your code will be a lot more readable and easier to follow. So the next thing to talk about will be data types. So Python has several built-in data types, and some of the more common ones are strings, which are just sequences of characters, essentially text, integers, which are whole numbers, floats, which are numbers with a decimal point, and booleans, which can either be a true or a false value. So a boolean is only true or false. And I have examples of each of these. So we see patient name, that's just a text string, so that's going to be a string variable type. We see the age, which is an integer type. The temperature, that has a decimal, so that's called a float. And then someone's smoking status, so is smoker, that's either true or false, so that's a Boolean data type. Now if we go through these other examples here, so someone's first name, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, patient temperature, and their flu shot status, so received flu shot. So we know what these are, but if you want to check, there's a way to do that with code. So if we just print the type, and then you put the name of the variable that you're interested in, so the type, variable name, and then Python will tell us what data type that variable is. So for the first name, that's a string data type. For the systolic blood pressure, that's an int or integer data type. Same thing for diastolic blood pressure, that's an int type. The patient temperature, remember that has a decimal point, so that's a float. And then received flu shot, since that's either true or false, that's a Boolean data type. Next up, let's look at some operators. And so operators are used to perform operations on the variables or the values that we've covered so far. So there's a few different operators that we're going to cover here: arithmetic operators, assignment operators, comparison operators, and logical operators. So arithmetic operators, it sounds simple, but that's just what they do. So they're just going to do math. So 45 plus 5, and you can turn Python or Jupyter Notebooks into an overly complicated calculator. So 45 plus 5, we get the output here of 50. 5 minus 3, the minus sign here is going to be our arithmetic operator, and we get 2. 10 times 4 is 40. 30 divided by 6 should be 5. Okay, that's good. It's correct. And so those are arithmetic operators there, where we're just doing some basic math on numbers. Now you can combine the arithmetic operators with some of these assignment operators. And so we've seen the assignment operator already, and that's just the single equal sign. So that's assigning this variable name to a particular piece of data. So in this case, we're looking at the total dose of a medication. So the morning dose is 50 and the evening dose is 70 milligrams. And that single equal sign is your assignment operator. And if we want to do some math on that, so the total dose will be the morning dose plus the evening dose. And then we'll print that out, and we can see that Python does that math for us. Now, you don't need to know this right now. This is what's called an F string, and we can get into that a little bit later if you want. It's not, like I said, not important for now, but that will calculate our total dose. So 50 plus 70 is 120. The total daily dose is 120 milligrams. So in this one, we've used the arithmetic operator along with the assignment operator, and then printed out the result. Now let's look at some comparison operators. So these should be pretty familiar as well. We have a greater than sign, we have an equal sign, a not equal sign, and a less than sign. And so this is going to output a Boolean value just based on this statement. So is this statement true or false? 80 greater than 50, that's true. 80 greater than 100, not true or false. Now when you have two equal sign, that means equals. So does 80 equal 80? So remember, one equal sign is just the assignment operator, but two is your true equal sign. So 80 equals 80, that is true. And then when you put the exclamation point in front of the equal sign, we're just going to flip that and do the opposite. So 80 does not equal 90. So that is a true statement since 80 does not equal 90. And then we have the less sign, 15 less than 8. That is not true, so we should see false there. And so those are your comparison operators. And then finally, for part 1 of this module, we're going to look at logical operators. So now we're going to combine the logical operators, so and, or, not, along with the comparison operators. Now with this, we're also going to get just a Boolean value of true or false. And when you combine these statements with the and operator, they both need to be true. So if only one of these is true, then the entire statement would be false. So both of these need to be true for the entire statement to be true. So 5 equals 5, which is true. 10 greater than 7, that is true. So this entire statement is true. Now, if one of these statements is false, 5 equals 5, that's true. 10 less than 9, that is false. So now the entire statement is false. Now, when we use the or operator, only one of those has to be true for the entire statement to be true. So 5 equals 5, that's true. So this 10 less than 9 doesn't really matter, because as long as one of these statements is true, then the entire statement will be true. Now, if both statements are false, then we would see false. So 7 does not equal 7, well, that's false. 95 greater than 200, well, that's also false. So now the entire statement is false. But if one of these had been true, then that would have been true as well. But since both are false, that entire statement is false. And now we have 7 equals 7. So just to show you what the not operator does, so that's true. But if we have not equals 7, it will just reverse that. And so 7 equals 7, that's true, but we're going to take the opposite of that using the not operator, and so now that's false. Now you can also combine that not operator with a statement, so let's just look at the statement part first. So 5 equals 5, or 10 is less than 9. Well, 5 equals 5 is true, and we're using the or operator, so this entire statement is true. But now we're going to take the opposite of that with the not operator, so this entire statement will be false now. All right, so that's going to end part 1 of Module 2, where we reviewed some of the Python basics, variables, data types, and operators.